First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak about the Julian Assange case. It's the second time there's a meeting in Belfast organised by a variety of individuals way before Christmas, way before COVID, and it was about Assange, and I was asked to speak at that. So I'm glad of the opportunity to speak about the case. So what I've written, which I'm going to read out here, and what I've worked on, it's from a number of sources compiled and put together, which hopefully address all the main points. So what did Assange do that was so reprehensible that he should be locked away, possibly for life? The US indictment accused him of two forms of conspiracy: trying to obtain secret information and attempting to access a US government computer. The first charge should surely not give journalists much pause for deliberation. Any reporter or editor worth their salt spends their lives looking for secret information and may well do exactly what Assange did with Chelsea Manning, which is encourage a source to come up with yet more information. The war logs, which were assiduously leaked by Manning and received by Assange, disclosed hundreds of grim reports, often supported by medical evidence, describing prisoners who had been shackled, blindfolded, hung from the ceiling by the wrists or ankles, and then subjected to relentless whipping, punching, kicking, electric shocks, and other tortures. Six of the reports even end with the apparent death of one of the abused detainees. So the question is, was that a story that any half-decent mainstream paper would have run if they had a sniff of it? Of course. Former Guardian editor Alan Rusbringer, who had many dealings with Assange, and they didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but this is what Rusbringer in one of his columns after the, or I think it was after the, before or after the case, when Assange wasn't extradited. Former Guardian editor Rusbringer says, what about the second charge, conspiracy to commit computer intrusion? It pays to read the wording of the US grand jury indictment. Manning, by this stage, had already downloaded hundreds of thousands of documents using their log on at the Department of Defense. The two conspirators were particularly interested in a trove of Guantanamo Bay detainee assessment briefs, and I think many editors would share that interest. Around 8th of March 2010, the two had a conversation about whether Assange could help Manning log into the computer she was already using with a different username. Such a measure, reads the indictment at paragraph 10, would have made it more difficult for investigators to identify Manning as the source of disclosure of classified information. On the face of it, according to the framing of his actions, this describes the behavior of a reporter seeking to help a source protect her identity. Is anyone in the world of mainstream journalism against that? Protecting your source, which is what journalists have tried to do and will be brought to court for many, many years. Protect your source. For any journalist who's worth their salt, him or her, that's something you would go to prison over. If you say to someone, I will protect your identity, and then you were subsequently to disclose their identity, that's a breach of journalism. You know, that's an ethic, that's a code which is built into any journalist, as I say, worth his or her salt about protecting a source. So the unexpected decision by Judge Vanessa Barrezza to deny the US demand to extradite Julian Assange, which obviously foiled efforts to send him to US supermax jail for the rest of his life. It was a welcome legal victory. It was welcome. Everyone welcomed it because I think a lot of us, nearly everybody thought that Assange was going to lose that particular case. But that welcome, as Jonathan pointed out, is swamped by the larger lessons of this that should disturb us deeply. Firstly, Assange, a journalist and a publisher, has been deprived of his liberty now for 10 years. According to UN experts looking at it, he's been detained and tortured for much of that time through intense physical confinement and endless psychological pressure. He's been bugged and spied on by the CIA during his time of political asylum in Ecuador's London embassy in ways that violated his most fundamental legal rights. And the judge who overseen the hearings has a serious conflict of interest with her family embedded in the UK security services that she did not declare and which should have required her to recuse herself from the case. The sole justification for this relentless attack on press freedom is that a 49-year-old man published documents which exposed US war crimes. That is the reason, and the only reason, that the US is seeking his extradition. Assange had been made had to be made to suffer horribly and in public, to be made an example of, and as somebody said, to deter other journalists from ever following his footsteps. He is the modern equivalent of a severed head on a pike displayed at the city gates. Another writer, Jonathan Cook, wrote in one of his blogs, US demand for exit was rejected on what was effectively a technicality. The US mass incarceration system is so obviously barbaric and depraved. It was shown conclusively by experts at the hearings back in September. Assange would be at grave risk of committing suicide should he become another victim of its supermax jails. And people have committed suicide in these supermax jails. And any of us who've been through what Assange had been through and were put in the super, I would imagine this, you're made of sterner stuff, that we would be also in danger of committing suicide. Assange is not alone there. You put someone under those conditions. But one should also not discard another of the British establishment's likely consideration to why they went for this kind of technical loophole, or however you want to describe it, that in a few days, well, actually not a few days, tomorrow, Trump will be gone from the White House and a new US administration will take his place. And some people have said there's no reason to be sentimental of it, which I agree, about President-elect Joe Biden. He's also in the past been a fan of mass incarceration. He was in the past in favour of the death penalty, and will be no more of a friend of dissident media, whistleblowers and journalism that challenge the national security state than was his Democratic predecessor, Barack Obama. But Biden probably doesn't, and this is speculation, we don't know. But some of the thinking is that Biden doesn't need the Assange case hanging over his head, becoming a rallying cry against him. You know, a residue of the Trump's administration's authoritarian instincts that his own officials will be forced to defend. It would be nice to imagine that the British legal, judicial and political establishment grew a backbone in ruling against extradition. The far more likely truth is, again, speculation, but it has some merit, I think, is that they sounded out the incoming Biden team and received permission to forgo an immediate ruling in favour of extradition on a technicality. So we must keep an eye on whether the new Biden administration decides to drop the appeal case, or perhaps more likely, his officials might let it rumble on, largely below the media's radar for many months to come. We will see. We must remember that the judge barrister in London backed all of the Trump's administration's main legal arguments for extradition, even though they were effectively demolished by Assange's lawyer. The judge accepted all of them, every one of them. Barrister accepted the US government's dangerous new definition of investigative journalism as espionage, and implied that Assange had also broken Britain's own draconian Official Secrets Act and exposing government war crimes. She agreed that the 2007 extradition treaty applies in Assange's case, ignoring the treaty's actual words that exempts political cases like his. So what she has done, she's opened the door for other journalists to be seized in their home countries and rendition to the USA for embarrassing Washington. Barrister accepted that protecting sources to digital age, as Assange did for whistleblower Chelsea Manning, an essential obligation on journalists in a free society that now, in her view, amounts to criminal hacking. She trashed free speech and press freedom rights, saying they did not provide, and her words were, unfettered discretion by Mr. Assange to decide what he's going to publish. She appeared to approve of the evidence shown that the US spied on Assange inside the Ecuadorian embassy, both in violation of international law and his client law privilege, a breach of his most fundamental legal rights that alone should have halted the proceedings. Barrister argued that Assange would receive a fair trial in the US, which is laughable, even because it was certain to take place in the Eastern District of Virginia, where the major US security intelligence services are headquartered. Any jury there would be dominated by US security personnel and their families, who would have no sympathy for Assange. So as we celebrate this ruling for Assange, at the moment where it stands, we must also loudly denounce it as an attack on press freedom. Even as we're offered with one hand a small prize in Assange's current legal victory, the establishment's other hand seizes much more from us. There is a final lesson from the Assange ruling. The last decade has been about discrediting, disgracing, and demonizing Assange. This ruling should be very much seen as a continuation of that process. The judge denied extradition only on the grounds of Assange's mental health and his autism and the fact that he's a suicide risk. In other words, the principal arguments for freeing Assange were decisively rejected. If he regains his freedom, it will solely because he's been characterised as mentally unsound, and that would be used to discredit not just Assange, but the cause for which he fought, the WikiLeaks organisation he helped to found, and all the wider dissidents who criticise establishment narratives. This, the idea that idea of Assange would become a part of popular public discourse. Here's a man who's mentally unsound. But we should say, and journalists should say, and people who support Assange should say, that Assange's battle to defend our freedoms was not autistic or evidence of mental illness. His struggle to hold the powerful to account for their actions was not evidence of dysfunction. And I would say it's a duty we all share to make our politics less corrupt, our legal systems more transparent, and our media less dishonest. The media in Ireland, as I come to the end here, were largely silent, north and south. I done a final search this morning, and you'd be hard pressed to find a scrap, a couple of tweets and stuff like that, but no sustained statements went out about the Assange case. And one of the things that we see is that many liberals, and even those who would say they're on the left, they use the rape allegations and putting quotes around that as a means of distancing themselves from Assange. And I would argue the battle is to put the attack on press freedoms at the very heart of the campaign to free Assange. I would also add as a footnote, those, including this group and other people in Britain, etc., and who turned up the court, those people, and in the Republic of Ireland and further afield in Europe, who have campaigned to keep Assange's case in the spotlight, even as much as the UK, and it shames me to say this as a journalist, even as much as the US and UK media work to keep the case in the dark, those people who have campaigned are the heroes in my eye, in terms of what they've done. So I'll leave it there, okay?